The snow fell in silence, but Malis Whitmore's sobs did not. She pressed her palm against the frozen stone of the chapel wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to mist in the bitter December air. The small church was abandoned, its pews thick with dust, its altar stripped bare. But it had a roof. It had walls. It had shelter from the Christmas Eve wind that howled across the Yorkshire moors like something mourning. She had nowhere else to go. 3 hours ago, she had been a governess. She had been respectable. She had been employed. Now she was nothing but a woman in a threadbare cloak, her valise sitting beside her like a faithful dog, her future as empty as the chapel around her. Lady Thornbury had not even let her stay until morning. The accusation still rang in her ears. Theft. The silver hairbrush from Lady Georgiana's vanity. Malis had never touched it, had never even been in the girl's private chambers. But the evidence had been found in her room, planted there, she was certain, by Lady Georgiana herself, who had never forgiven Malis for refusing to lie about her secret correspondence with the gardener's son. It did not matter. The truth did not matter. What mattered was that Lady Thornbury had believed her daughter, and Malis had been cast out on Christmas Eve with nothing but her wages and a reference that would never be written. She wiped her eyes with frozen fingers. Self-pity would not save her. Tomorrow she would walk to the village. Tomorrow she would find a coaching inn. Tomorrow she would figure out how to reach her mother and brother in London, how to explain her failure, how to survive. But tonight, she was allowed to weep. The chapel door groaned open. Malis spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall, snow dusting his dark greatcoat, like powdered sugar on morning clothes. She could not see his face, only the sharp lines of his jaw and the glint of eyes catching moonlight through the broken window. She stumbled backward, knocking her valise against a pew. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Who are you?" The voice was low, clipped, and aristocratic. "What are you doing in my chapel?" His chapel. She had wandered onto private grounds. Of course she had, because this night could not possibly get worse. "I apologize, sir." Her voice came out hoarse, wrecked from crying. "I did not realize this was private property. I only needed shelter from the storm. I will leave immediately." She reached for her valise, but he stepped forward, blocking the moonlight entirely. Now she could see his face, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a hard line, eyes the color of winter slate, cold and assessing. He was perhaps 30, and he looked at her the way one might look at an unexpected problem that had appeared on one's doorstep. "You have been crying," he said. It was not a question. Malis lifted her chin. "The cold, or perhaps I was moved by the spirit of the season. In an abandoned chapel in the middle of a snowstorm." His eyebrow rose fractionally. "Forgive me if I find that unlikely. Forgive me if I find your interrogation unwelcome." The words escaped before she could stop them. She was too tired, too broken, and too cold to manage deference. Silence stretched between them, sharp as the wind outside. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You have a tongue on you. I have very little else at the moment, sir. If you would be so kind as to let me pass, I will trouble you no further." She tried to move around him, but he did not budge. His gaze swept over her, cataloging her worn cloak, her simple dress, the valise that contained everything she owned in the world. "Where would you go?" he asked quietly. "The nearest village is 4 miles. The snow is already half a foot deep and rising. You would freeze before you reach the main road. Then I will wait here until morning, in an unheated chapel with no fire and no food." Maëlys said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was right, and they both knew it. The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Come with me." It was not an invitation. It was a command, issued with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I do not know you, sir, and yet you have no alternatives." His voice softened slightly, losing some of its edge. "I am offering you shelter, not harm. My home is a quarter-mile from here. You will have a fire, a meal, and a bed for the night. Tomorrow, when the storm has passed, we can discuss your circumstances." "Why would you do that?" Milas asked, suspicious despite her desperation. "You do not know me either." "Because it is Christmas Eve," he said simply. "And I am not in the habit of leaving women to freeze to death in my chapel." The words were practical, not kind. He offered no warmth, no reassurance beyond the bare facts. And yet Malis found herself reaching for her valise. She had no choice. She knew that. But something in his eyes, something beneath the ice, told her she was not walking into danger. At least, she prayed she was not. The walk through the snow was brutal. Maelis clutched her cloak against the wind, while the stranger walked beside her, silent and steady, his boots crunching through the drifts with ease. He did not offer his arm. He did not make conversation. He simply led. When the house emerged from the darkness, Milas stopped breathing. It was not a house. It was a palace, a sprawling stone manor with towers and turrets, and windows blazing with candlelight. It rose from the snow-covered grounds like something from a fairy tale, grand and imposing, and utterly beyond anything she had ever seen. "This is your home?" she whispered. "Thornfield Hall," he confirmed. "And I am Caius Ashford." The name hit her like a physical blow. Ashford, the Duke of Thornfield, the most powerful man in 3 counties, the man whose estate bordered the Thornbury property, whose name was spoken in whispers, whose reputation for coldness was legendary. She had just demanded that a duke let her pass. She had told a duke he was unwelcome. "Your Grace." The honorific came out strangled. "I did not realize. I apologize for my earlier rudeness." "Do not apologize," he said, already moving toward the massive front doors. It was refreshing. Servants appeared the moment they entered, materializing from shadows with practiced efficiency. Coats were taken. Instructions were murmured. A fire was promised. Through it all, Malis stood frozen in the entrance hall, overwhelmed by the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, and the portraits of stern-faced Ashfords watching from gilded frames. Then a new voice shattered the quiet. "Caius, you found her!" A young woman descended the stairs in a rush of silk and excitement. She was perhaps 19, with the same dark hair as the Duke, but none of his coldness. Her eyes were bright with curiosity as she seized Milas's hands. "We saw you from the window, crossing toward the chapel. I told Caius someone was out there. I told him we had to help. Are you frozen?" "You must be frozen. Come, we have hot chocolate, and Cook has saved dinner, and you must tell us everything." "Sibylla," the Duke said warningly, "perhaps give our guest a moment to breathe. She can breathe while we warm her." Sibylla squeezed Milas's hands tightly. "I am Lady Sibylla Ashford, this impossible man's sister. And you are?" "Milas Whitmore." I am," she faltered, shame flooding her chest. "I was a governess. Until this evening." Sibylla's expression shifted to something fierce and protective. What happened? And so Milas told them. Not everything, not the details that still burned with humiliation, but enough. The false accusation, the dismissal, the cast out into the snow on Christmas Eve with no references and no recourse. When she finished, silence filled the hall. Sibylla's face had gone pale with outrage. The Duke's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in those slate-gray eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or opportunity. "That is monstrous," Sibylla declared. "Simply monstrous. The Thornberry family should be ashamed." "They are not in the habit of shame," Milas said quietly. "But I appreciate your sympathy, Lady Sibylla. I will leave in the morning, once the storm passes. I should not impose further." "Leave?" Sibylla looked scandalized. "On Christmas Day? With no position, no references, nowhere to go? I will manage. You will freeze." The Duke's voice cut through the conversation. "Or starve. Or both." He turned to his sister. "Sibylla, give us a moment." "But Caius." "A moment." Sibylla looked rebellious, but she retreated up the stairs with a final encouraging glance at Milas. When they were alone, the Duke moved closer. His presence filled the space, commanding and intense. "You need employment," he said. "I need a governess." Milas blinked. "I beg your pardon." "My niece, Posey. She is 7 years old, orphaned when my brother and his wife died last spring. She has had 3 governesses since. None have lasted longer than a month. She is," he paused, searching for the word, "spirited. And you are offering me the position?" "I am offering you an opportunity to prove yourself." He clasped his hands behind his back. "But there is more. My aunt, Lady Heloise, arrives tomorrow with a house party of guests for the Christmas season. Among them is Lady Iolanthe Vance, the woman my aunt has decided I should marry." Milas waited, unsure where this was leading. "Lady Iolanthe was betrothed to my brother before his death. My aunt believes she should have been Duchess, and that I should honor my brother's memory by taking her as my wife. I do not share this belief." "Why not?" "Because I do not love her, and because I suspect her devotion is to the title, not to me." His jaw tightened. "But my aunt is relentless. She has orchestrated this entire house party to force the match, unless I present an alternative." "An alternative," Milas repeated slowly. "And you want me to be that alternative. You are educated, well-spoken, clearly capable of holding your own in conversation." He gestured vaguely at her. "You could pass as a gentlewoman fallen on hard times, which is precisely what you are. If you play the role of a potential match, a friend of Sibylla's invited for the season, my aunt will be forced to redirect her scheming. And Lady Iolanthe? We'll find another duke to pursue." Milas's head was spinning. This morning she had been a governess. This evening she had been dismissed in disgrace. Now she was being asked to play pretend at a duke's side. "You want me to deceive your entire family. I want you to help me survive Christmas without being shackled to a woman I do not want. In exchange, you will have employment, shelter, wages, and references that will open any door in England." His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. Is that not worth a little performance? She should say no. This was madness, dangerous, improper, and destined for disaster. She was a governess's daughter from a modest London family. She did not belong in drawing rooms with dukes and ladies and society schemes. But she also had no alternatives, no references, no home, no future. 3 conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. "You are negotiating with me. You need me as much as I need this opportunity. That makes us equals, Your Grace, at least in this." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Name your conditions." "First, I want a letter sent to my family explaining that I have accepted a respectable position. Nothing about schemes or deceptions. Just the truth that I am employed." Done. "Second, when this ends, I want references, real ones, that will help me secure a proper position. Governess, companion, whatever doors your connections can open." Agreed. And third, Milas met his gaze directly. The moment you decide to actually pursue someone, whether Lady Iolanthe or anyone else, this arrangement ends immediately. I will not be made a fool of, Your Grace. I may be desperate, but I am not stupid. The silence between them felt like a held breath. Then the Duke extended his hand. You have my word. All 3 conditions. Do we have an agreement, Miss Whitmore? Milas looked at his outstretched hand. Elegant, powerful, belonging to a world she had never imagined entering. She took it. We have an agreement. His grip was warm despite the cold. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then welcome to Thornfield Hall, he said. I hope you survive Christmas. It was not comforting, but somehow, impossibly, Milas found herself wanting to try. Tomorrow she would meet his aunt. Tomorrow she would begin her performance. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, she was no longer alone. The Crimson Suite was larger than any room Milas had ever slept in. She stood in the center of the chamber, turning slowly, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. A 4-poster bed draped in deep red velvet dominated one wall. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace, large enough to roast a pig. The wardrobe alone could have held her entire London bedroom with space to spare. Through the window, snow continued to fall, blanketing Thornfield Hall in white silence. Somewhere in this vast house, a duke was trusting her to save him from an unwanted marriage. The absurdity of it made her want to laugh and weep simultaneously. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Miss? A young maid entered, carrying a tray laden with more food than Milas had seen in weeks. I am Tansy. His Grace asked me to attend to you. I have brought supper, and I have laid out a nightgown, and the fire should warm the room shortly. Is there anything else you require? Milas's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. The tray held roasted chicken, fresh bread, winter vegetables glistening with butter, and a pot of chocolate that smelled like heaven. This is too much, she whispered. His Grace was very specific. Tansy set the tray on a small table by the fire. He said you had been through an ordeal and were to want for nothing. His Grace is generous. Tansy hesitated, then lowered her voice. He is not what people say, miss. Cold, yes. Distant, certainly. But not cruel. Never cruel. Since his brother died, he has carried this house on his shoulders alone. It has cost him something, I think. Before Milas could respond, Tansy curtsied and departed, leaving her alone with the fire and the feast and the weight of a strange new world. She ate slowly, savoring each bite like a woman who had learned never to take food for granted. The chocolate was rich and warm, spreading heat through her frozen limbs. By the time she finished, exhaustion pressed against her like a physical force. But sleep did not come easily. She lay in the magnificent bed, staring at the canopy above, replaying every moment of the evening. The Duke's cold eyes thawing slightly when she challenged him. His sister's fierce warmth. The bargain that had been struck like a deal with the devil, except the devil had offered her salvation instead of damnation. Tomorrow she would meet Lady Heloise, the aunt who ruled this household with iron expectations. Tomorrow she would begin her performance as a potential match for a man so far above her station that the mere idea bordered on comedy. Tomorrow she would meet Posy, the spirited 7-year-old niece who had driven away 3 governesses in 6 months. What had she agreed to? A soft sound drew her attention. A creak of floorboards in the hallway, a murmur of voices. Then, unmistakably, a child's sob. Milas rose before she could think better of it. She wrapped herself in the dressing gown Tansy had provided and crept to the door, opening it just a crack. In the dim corridor, illuminated by a single candle, stood a small figure in a white nightgown. Dark curls tumbled around a tear-streaked face. The child could not have been more than 7, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. Posy. It had to be Posy. The girl looked up, startled, her eyes wide and wet in the candlelight. "I could not sleep," she whispered. "I heard the storm, and I thought perhaps Mama and Papa were trying to come home." The words shattered something in Milas's chest. She knew that hope. She knew that impossible wish that death could somehow be undone, that loved ones could return, if only you believed hard enough. She knelt slowly, bringing herself to the child's level. "I am Milas," she said softly. "I am new here. I also could not sleep. Perhaps we could not sleep together. I find storms less frightening with company." Posy studied her with the suspicious assessment of a child who had learned that adults often lied. "The other governesses did not like me," she said finally. Then the other governesses were fools. Something flickered in the girl's eyes. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of it. "I have a rabbit," Posy offered, holding up the worn toy. "His name is Admiral Whiskers. That is an excellent name for a rabbit. He was brave in the war." Milas bit back a smile. "He looks very distinguished." For a long moment, Posy simply stared at her. Then, without warning, she slipped her small hand into Milas's. "You may walk me back to my room," she announced. "If you wish, I would be honored." They walked together through the shadowed corridor, the child's hand warm in hers, Admiral Whiskers keeping solemn watch. When they reached Posy's chamber, the girl paused at the door. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Yes." "And the day after?" "I hope so." Posy considered this. Then she nodded once, a tiny gesture of acceptance. "Good night, Miss Milas." "Good night, Posy." The door closed softly. Milas stood in the corridor, her heart full of something she could not name. She had come here a stranger, a refugee, a woman with nothing. But in this one small moment, she had been needed. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. She returned to her room, and when sleep finally came, she dreamed of storms that gentled, and children who trusted, and dukes with winter eyes that held secrets she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, Lady Heloise awaited. Tomorrow, the true test would begin. Christmas morning dawned in shades of silver and white, the snow-covered grounds of Thornfield Hall glittering beneath a pale winter sun. Milas dressed carefully in a gown that Tansy had produced from somewhere, deep green wool that fit surprisingly well. Lady Sibylla had it sent up, Tansy explained with a knowing smile. She said you would need something proper for meeting Lady Heloise. Meeting was a gentle word for what Milas suspected would be an interrogation. She descended the main staircase with her pulse racing beneath her skin, hyper-aware of the portraits watching from the walls. Generations of Ashfords, their painted eyes following her every step, judging her worthiness to walk among them. She was not worthy. She knew that. But she had made a bargain, and she would see it through. The breakfast room was warm and bright, a fire blazing in the hearth, the table laden with more food than Milas had seen in a month. Sibylla was already there, picking at toast, her expression unusually serious. "She is in the morning room," Sibylla said without preamble. She arrived at dawn with the first clearing of the roads. "Caius is with her now, explaining your presence. Does she know the truth? She knows what Caius has chosen to tell her." Sibylla's smile was thin, which is not quite the truth, but not quite a lie. "You are my friend from London, invited for the Christmas season. That is the story. And if she investigates, she will." Sibylla rose, squeezing Milas's hand. "But she will find nothing damning. You are a gentlewoman of modest means. Your family is respectable. Your education is superior. There is no scandal attached to your name, whatever lies the Thornberrys may have told themselves. Malis wished she shared that confidence. A footman appeared in the doorway. Lady Heloise requests Miss Whitmore's presence in the morning room. Sibylla gave her hand one final squeeze. Remember, she only intimidates people she intends to control. Stand your ground. It was not comforting advice. The morning room was elegant and cold despite the fire, decorated in shades of ice blue and silver that matched the snow outside. Lady Heloise Ashford sat in a high-backed chair like a queen on her throne, her silver hair perfectly arranged, and her black morning dress austere and impeccable. She was perhaps 60, with the same slate-gray eyes as her nephew, but sharper, colder. They swept over Malis with the precision of a surgeon's blade, cataloging every detail. The Duke stood by the window, his expression carefully neutral. He did not speak as Malis entered, but his eyes met hers briefly. A warning, perhaps, or encouragement. She could not tell which. So, Lady Heloise said, her voice carrying the frost of generations. This is the young woman who appeared from nowhere on Christmas Eve. Maëlys curtsied deeply. Lady Heloise, I apologize for my unconventional arrival. Unconventional. The older woman's lips thinned. That is one word for it. Another might be suspicious, or convenient, or calculating. Aunt, the Duke began, but Lady Heloise silenced him with a raised hand. I will form my own opinions, Caius. Leave us. For a moment, Maëlys thought he would refuse. Something flickered in his jaw, a tension that suggested he did not appreciate being dismissed in his own home. But he inclined his head slightly and departed, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. They were alone. Lady Heloise gestured to a chair opposite her own. Sit. Maëlys sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. My nephew tells me you are a friend of Sibylla's from London, Lady Heloise began, that you were traveling to visit family when you became stranded in the storm, that you sought shelter in our chapel quite by coincidence. That is the story, yes. Lady Heloise's eyebrow rose. The story. Maëlys met her gaze directly. I could lie to you, Lady Heloise. I could maintain the fiction your nephew has constructed, but I suspect you would see through it immediately, and I have no desire to begin our acquaintance with disrespect. The silence that followed was absolute. Go on, Lady Heloise said finally. Her voice had not warmed, but something in her posture had shifted. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of interest. And so Maëlys told the truth. She spoke of her father's death 5 years ago, of her mother taking in sewing to survive, of her brother's struggles to find steady work, of her own position as governess to the Thornberry family, the false accusation, the dismissal on Christmas Eve. She spoke of wandering onto Thornfield grounds, seeking shelter, finding the Duke instead. She did not speak of the bargain. That was his secret to keep or reveal. But everything else she laid bare, her poverty, her desperation, her complete lack of alternatives. When she finished, Lady Heloise regarded her with an expression Maëlys could not read. You are penniless, the older woman said flatly, without references, without connections, without any earthly reason to be in my nephew's home. Yes, and yet here you sit, in borrowed clothes, at my family's table, on Christmas morning. Maëlys lifted her chin. I did not ask for charity, Lady Heloise. I was offered shelter and employment as governess to Lady Posey. I intend to earn my place here, not beg for it. Employment, Lady Heloise repeated. Is that all you intend to pursue? The question was loaded. Maëlys understood what was being asked. Are you here for his money, his title, his heart? Your nephew is far above my station, she said carefully. I am under no illusions about my place in this household. I am here to work, to survive the winter, and to secure references that will allow me to continue supporting my family. Nothing more. Lady Heloise studied her for a long, terrible moment. Then, impossibly, she laughed. It was a short sound, brittle and surprised, as if she had not expected to make it. "You have spine," she declared. "Foolish spine, perhaps. But spine nonetheless." Her eyes narrowed. "I do not trust you, Miss Whitmore. I do not know your true intentions, and I will be watching you closely. But I will say this. You are the first person in this house who has not lied to my face in months. That earns you a chance, nothing more." Maëlys released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you, Lady Heloise. Do not thank me yet." The older woman rose, smoothing her skirts. "The house party arrives this afternoon. Lady Iolanthe will be among them. If you are wise, you will stay out of her way. She does not take kindly to competition. I am not competing for anything." Lady Heloise paused at the door, glancing back with something almost like pity. "That is what they all say, Miss Whitmore. Until they are." She swept from the room, leaving Maëlys alone with the fire and the weight of a warning she did not fully understand. Lady Iolanthe, the woman who should have been Duchess, the woman Lady Heloise had chosen for the Duke, the woman who would see Maëlys as a threat, regardless of the truth. Christmas had barely begun, and already the battlefield was being drawn. Maëlys rose, straightening her borrowed dress, steeling her spine. She had survived poverty. She had survived false accusations. She had survived a Christmas Eve snowstorm. She would survive this, too. She had to. The house party arrived in a parade of carriages and chaos. Maëlys watched from the library window as lords and ladies emerged into the snow-dusted courtyard, their furs and jewels glittering in the winter sunlight. Footmen scurried to collect luggage. Servants appeared with warming drinks. Laughter echoed across the grounds, bright and artificial. And at the center of it all, descending from the grandest carriage like a queen, arriving at her coronation, was Lady Iolanthe Vance. She was beautiful. Maëlys had expected that, but the reality was still a blow. Golden hair arranged in perfect curls, pale blue eyes that matched the winter sky, a figure draped in white fur that made her look like a snow princess from a fairy tale. She was everything Maëlys was not. Wealthy, connected, belonging. Impressive, is she not? Maëlys startled. The Duke had appeared beside her, silent as a shadow, his gaze fixed on the scene below. "She is lovely," Maëlys admitted. "She's calculated. Every gesture, every smile, every word. She's been preparing for this role since she was 16. His voice held no warmth. "My brother adored her. I often wondered if she adored him in return, or merely the title he represented. That is a harsh assessment. It is an honest one." He turned from the window, and Maëlys was struck again by the weariness in his eyes, the exhaustion of a man carrying burdens he had never expected to bear. "My brother was kind, gentle. He saw the best in everyone, including Iolanthe. I do not have that gift. Perhaps you simply see clearly. Perhaps I see too much." He paused, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "How did you find my aunt this morning? She does not trust me. She does not trust anyone. But she did not have you thrown out, which is more than most receive." High praise. From Lady Heloise? Extraordinarily high. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You impressed her, I could tell. I told her the truth. That is all. That is precisely what impressed her. This household has been drowning in polite lies for months. Your honesty is refreshing." Maëlys wanted to point out that their entire arrangement was built on deception, but footsteps in the corridor interrupted her. Sibylla burst through the door, flushed with excitement. "They are here. Everyone is here. Maëlys, You must come down. I want to introduce you before Iolanthe has a chance to poison everyone against you." "That seems premature," Milas said dryly. "You don't know Iolanthe. She is already asking questions. Who is the mysterious woman staying at Thornfield? Why she was not mentioned in any correspondence? How did she appear on Christmas Eve so conveniently?" Sibylla grabbed her hand. "We must establish you as my friend before she can establish you as an interloper." The afternoon that followed was exhausting. Malis was introduced to more lords and ladies than she could possibly remember. The Earl of Ashbridge and his simpering wife. The Dowager Viscountess of Pemberton, who examined Malis through a lorgnette like she was an insect. Sir Gideon Hartwell, a jovial man with impressive whiskers, who seemed genuinely kind. Lady Venetia Crane, a sharp-eyed widow who missed nothing. And Lady Iolanthe, who greeted Malis with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Miss Whitmore," her voice was honey over ice. "How delightful to meet you. Sibylla has told me so much about your friendship." "All good things, I hope," Milas replied. "Of course, though I confess I do not recall Sibylla ever mentioning you before. Strange, is it not, that such a dear friend would never come up in conversation?" "We have been corresponding," Sibylla interjected quickly. "Letters are more intimate than idle gossip." "Indeed." Iolanthe's gaze swept over Malis's borrowed dress, cataloging its quality, its cut, its obvious signs of being made for someone else. "Well, I am certain we will become better acquainted over the holiday. I do so enjoy learning about new people." The threat was clear. Iolanthe intended to investigate, to probe, to find the cracks in Malis's story and exploit them. "I look forward to it," Milas said, refusing to flinch. That evening, after the guests had retired to dress for dinner, Malis escaped to the nursery. Posy was waiting for her, Admiral Whiskers clutched tight, a book of fairy tales open on her lap. "You came," the girl said, as if she had not quite believed it. "I promised I would." They read together for an hour, Maelis giving voices to wicked witches and brave princesses, while Posy listened with rapt attention. It was the first peace Maelis had felt all day, this simple moment with a child who asked nothing of her except presence. "Miss Malis?" Posy asked when the story ended. "Yes. Do you think my mama and papa can see me? From heaven?" Milas's heart clenched. "I think they watch over you every day. I think they are very proud of you. The other governesses said I was difficult, that I should not speak of them so much." Malis took the girl's hand gently. "Then the other governesses were wrong. You should speak of them whenever you wish. Remembering the people we love is how we keep them alive." Posy considered this. Then she nodded, satisfied. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Every day," Milas promised, "as long as I am here." It was a promise she intended to keep, whatever Lady Iolanthe's schemes might bring. When she returned to her room to dress for dinner, she found a package on her bed. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a green ribbon, the color of the dress she had worn that morning. Inside was a book, not new, but well-loved, its leather cover soft with age. A collection of Christmas poems and carols, illustrated with delicate watercolors of snow-covered villages and candlelit windows. A note was tucked inside the front cover, written in a precise, elegant hand. "This belonged to my mother. She read from it every Christmas Eve until she died. Sibylla and I have heard these poems so many times, we know them by heart. But the book has sat on a shelf for 15 years. Unread. I think she would have wanted it to bring someone joy again." C. Malis pressed the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. It was not a gift given lightly. This was an heirloom, a piece of his family, a memory made tangible. He had given her his mother's book. She thought of the Duke's cold eyes, his careful distance, and the walls he built around himself like fortress battlements. And then she thought of this, a gift that meant vulnerability, that meant trust, that meant something she could not yet name. What was she supposed to do with that? What was she supposed to feel? A knock at the door startled her. Tansy entered, carrying a gown of deep crimson velvet that took Melis's breath away. "From Lady Sibylla," Tansy said with a smile. "For tonight's dinner. She said you must look like you belong." Melis touched the fabric, soft as clouds beneath her fingers. She did not belong. She knew that. But for one night, in borrowed velvet and unexpected kindness, perhaps she could pretend. The book of Christmas poems sat on her bedside table as Tansy helped her dress, its presence a quiet comfort. His mother's book. She wondered what else the Duke kept hidden beneath that icy exterior. What other pieces of himself he had locked away, too fragile to risk. She wondered if she would ever know. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as elegance. The great dining hall of Thornfield blazed with candlelight, the long table set with crystal and silver that sparkled like captured stars. Melis was seated near the center, close enough to observe Lady Iolanthe holding court at the Duke's right hand, far enough to feel every inch of distance between their worlds. The conversation flowed in currents she could barely navigate. Parliamentary gossip, continental politics, the scandalous elopement of some viscount's daughter with an Italian opera singer. Names and references that meant nothing to her, tossed about like currency among people who had never known a day of want. "Miss Whitmore," Lady Iolanthe's voice cut through the chatter, silencing conversations in its wake. "I understand you are newly arrived from London. What does your family do there?" Every eye at the table turned to Melis. She felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. "My mother is a widow," she said steadily. "My father was a clerk with the Admiralty before his death. We live modestly but respectably." A clerk. Iolanthe let the word hang in the air, dripping with condescension. How charming. "And your brother?" "He is seeking a position in commerce." "Commerce." Another loaded pause. How industrious. Melis refused to look away. "We cannot all be born to titles, Lady Iolanthe. Some of us must work for our place in the world. I consider that a virtue, not a failing." Silence fell over the table like a held breath. Somewhere to her left, Melis heard Sir Gideon choke on his wine. Then Lady Heloise spoke, her voice sharp and clear. "Well said, Miss Whitmore. Hard work built this country more than inheritance ever did." "Caius, pass the venison." The moment broke. Conversations resumed, but Melis caught Iolanthe's expression before it smoothed into pleasant neutrality, and what she saw there was cold, calculating fury. She had made an enemy tonight, a powerful one. But she had also, somehow, earned Lady Heloise's approval. Again. After dinner, the party retired to the grand ballroom for the Christmas Eve celebration. Musicians played carols in one corner, while servants circulated with champagne and mulled wine. Evergreen garlands draped every surface, their scent mixing with wood smoke and candle wax. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Melis stood near the wall, watching the guests mingle, when the Duke appeared beside her. "You handled Iolanthe well," he said quietly. "I made her angry. You refuse to be intimidated. There is a difference." His gaze swept over the room, lingering briefly on Iolanthe's golden head. She is not accustomed to opposition. It unsettles her. She will retaliate, undoubtedly. But not tonight. Tonight she will smile and scheme and wait for an opportunity. That is her way. You know her well. I know her type. He turned to face Melis, and something shifted in his expression. Softened. Dance with me. It was not a question. The musicians had begun a waltz, and already couples were taking the floor. I am not certain that is wise, Milas said, even as her heart raced. Wisdom is overrated. He extended his hand. Dance with me, Miss Whitmore. Let them watch. She took his hand. The waltz was different from the country dances Milas had learned in her youth. It was intimate, his hand at her waist, burning through the velvet of her gown, her palm pressed to his, feeling the warmth of his skin through their gloves, his eyes holding hers as they moved together through the candlelit room. You are trembling, he observed. I have never danced with a duke before. Then pretend I am not one. That seems difficult, given the circumstances. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. Try. She tried. She let herself feel the music instead of counting steps. Let herself trust his lead as they turned and swept across the floor. Let herself forget, for one breathless moment, that this was performance, arrangement, pretend. When she looked up, she caught Lady Iolanthe watching from the edge of the room. The woman's face was perfectly composed, but her eyes burned with something dangerous. She is staring, Milas whispered. Let her stare. Everyone is staring. Good. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Then we are accomplishing our purpose. Is that all this is? The words escaped before she could stop them. Purpose? The Duke's steps faltered for just a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher. No, it is not all this is. Not anymore. The waltz ended before she could respond. He released her with careful correctness, bowing over her hand. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore. The pleasure was mine, Your Grace. They were performing. She knew that. So why did her heart refuse to believe it? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More dances with other partners, carefully orchestrated by Sibylla. Conversation with Lady Venetia, who was sharper than she appeared. Polite evasions of Lord Ashbridge's tedious wife. When the clock struck midnight, marking the official arrival of Christmas, the guests gathered in the hall for the exchanging of gifts. Milas hung back, having nothing to give, but Sibylla pressed a small package into her hands. From me, she whispered. Open it later. It was a silver hair comb, delicate and beautiful. Too expensive. Too generous. Milas blinked back tears. And then Lady Iolanthe struck. She approached with a smile like poisoned honey, a small wrapped package in her hands. Miss Whitmore, since we are exchanging gifts, I wanted to offer you something as well. A token of welcome. Milas accepted the package warily. Inside was a pair of gloves. Fine quality, clearly expensive, but they were also clearly second-hand. The silk was worn at the fingertips. A small stain marked one cuff. They were cast-offs. Charity. Given publicly, designed to humiliate. How generous, Milas said, her voice steady despite the heat flooding her face. Though I fear you must have made a mistake. These appear to have been used. The room went silent. Iolanthe's smile froze. I beg your pardon? These gloves. They are worn, stained. Milas held them up for the room to see. Surely you did not intend to give me your discards, Lady Iolanthe. That would be remarkably poor manners. Someone gasped. Sir Gideon laughed, quickly stifling it. Lady Heloise's eyebrow rose in what might have been appreciation. Iolanthe's face flushed crimson. I am certain I do not know what you mean. Then perhaps you should inspect your gifts more carefully before offering them. Milas curtsied, setting the gloves aside. Thank you for the thought, Lady Iolanthe. I am sure it came from the heart. She turned and walked away, her spine straight, her hands shaking at her sides. The whispers followed her like a tide. She made it to the terrace before the tears threatened to fall. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp, clearing her head. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting through the darkness. She gripped the stone balustrade and tried to breathe. That was magnificent. She spun around. The Duke stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. That was foolish, she countered. I should not have confronted her publicly. I have made things worse. You defended yourself with grace and wit. He stepped onto the terrace, the snow catching in his dark hair. Iolanthe attempted to humiliate you. You turned the weapon back on her. That is not foolish. That is strength. I am not strong. I am terrified. The admission escaped before she could stop it. I do not belong here. I am playing a part I was never meant to play, and eventually the performance will fail. And then what? And then I will be alone again. The Duke moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite the cold. You are not alone, he said quietly. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, you are not alone. Not anymore. His hand rose to her face, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. Maelys forgot how to breathe. Miss Whitmore, he began. Caius. Sibylla's voice shattered the moment. They stepped apart as his sister appeared in the doorway, flushed and urgent. Grandmother is calling for you. Something about Lady Iolanthe demanding satisfaction. It is chaos in there. The Duke's jaw tightened. Of course it is. He glanced back at Maelys, and something in his eyes made her heart stumble. We will finish this conversation, he said. Soon. Then he was gone, leaving her alone on the terrace with the snow and the moonlight and the echo of his touch on her skin. Soon, he had said. She wondered what that meant. She wondered if she was ready to find out. The days following Christmas Eve should have been peaceful. They were not. Lady Iolanthe had retreated into icy politeness, her fury banked, but not extinguished. She watched Maelys with the patient calculation of a cat watching a mouse, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Maelys avoided her whenever possible, which was not often. The house party threw them together constantly, at meals, at cards, at the endless rounds of holiday entertainment that Lady Heloise orchestrated with military precision. But in stolen moments, there was the Duke. They met in the library after breakfast, ostensibly to discuss her duties with Posey, but truly to simply exist in the same space. He would read estate reports, while she read poetry. They rarely spoke, but the silence between them had grown comfortable, companionable, dangerous. You are doing well with Posey, he said one morning, not looking up from his papers. She asked for you at breakfast. That has not happened with any previous governess. She is a remarkable child. She is grieving. He set down his pen, finally meeting her eyes. As am I suppose, though I am less honest about it. Grief is not something to be ashamed of. No, but it is something I have allowed to consume me. He stood, moving to the window, his back to her. When Edmund died, I thought I would drown in it. The responsibilities, the expectations, and the weight of suddenly being everything my family needed. I stopped feeling anything at all because feeling hurt too much. And now. He turned, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. Now I am beginning to feel again, and I am not certain I know how. Maelys rose, drawn toward him despite every warning screaming in her mind. Perhaps you do not need to know, she said softly. Perhaps you simply need to allow it. Is that what you do? I try. They stood close now, closer than propriety allowed. She could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadows beneath them, the evidence of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. Maelys, her name on his lips was a revelation. Not Miss Whitmore. Maelys. We should not, she whispered. No, we should not. But neither of them moved away. The door opened. They sprang apart as Lady Heloise entered, her sharp gaze sweeping over them with knowing assessment. Am I interrupting? Not at all. The Duke's voice was perfectly controlled. Miss Whitmore and I were discussing her progress with Posey. Indeed. Lady Eloise did not look convinced. Well, you may continue your discussion later. I require Miss Whitmore's assistance with the afternoon's entertainment. Malis curtsied and escaped, her heart pounding. She felt Lady Eloise's eyes on her back as she fled. The afternoon's entertainment proved to be a sleigh ride through the snow-covered grounds. Malis found herself bundled into a sleigh with Sibylla and two young ladies, whose names she had already forgotten. "They are talking about you," Sibylla murmured as they glided past frozen hedgerows. "Iolanthe has been whispering to anyone who will listen. She claims you are a fortune hunter, a schemer who appeared conveniently to entrap my brother. I expected as much. Do not worry. Most people think she is merely jealous." But Sibylla hesitated. "She is clever, Malis. Do not underestimate her. I do not intend to." That evening, after dinner, Malis climbed the stairs to the nursery for her nightly visit with Posey. But she found the girls' room empty, the bed unslept in. Panic seized her chest. She searched the corridor, the playroom, the small sitting room where Posey sometimes hid when she was sad. Nothing. Then she heard it, a muffled sob, coming from behind a closed door at the end of the hall. The door opened onto a small gallery, dark except for moonlight streaming through tall windows. And there, curled beneath a portrait of a smiling couple, was Posey. The portrait showed Edmund Ashford and his wife, Posey's parents. The child looked up as Malis approached, her face streaked with tears. "I miss them," she whispered. "Christmas was Mama's favorite. She would sing carols, and we would decorate the tree together, and Papa would carry me on his shoulders to put the angel on top. And now they are gone, and everyone pretends to be happy. But I know they are not, and I do not know how to be happy either." Malis sank to the floor beside her, gathering the small body into her arms. "It is all right to be sad," she murmured against Posey's hair. "It is all right to miss them." "You do not have to pretend. The other governesses said I should be brave. Crying is brave. Feeling your grief instead of hiding from it is the bravest thing anyone can do." They sat together in the darkness, the portrait watching over them, while Posey cried herself out. When the sobs finally quieted, the girl looked up at Malis with red-rimmed eyes. "Will you stay, as long as you need me? Do you promise?" Malis thought of the Duke, of Lady Iolanthe, of the precarious charade she was maintaining. She thought of all the reasons this could not last, all the ways it could fall apart. But looking into this child's eyes, she could not say any of that. She promised. It was a promise she prayed she could keep. Somewhere below, the house party continued, oblivious. But up here, in the moonlit gallery, Malis held a grieving child and wondered how much longer she could pretend that her heart wasn't already lost. To Posey, to this house, to him. The realization terrified her, and she could not bring herself to run from it. The 12th night ball was to be the crown jewel of the Christmas season. Lady Eloise had spared no expense. The ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors until the entire room seemed to glow from within. Evergreen garlands twined with white roses adorned every surface. An orchestra played in the gallery above, filling the air with music that seemed to shimmer. Maïlis descended the staircase in a gown of midnight blue silk, silver thread embroidered along the bodice like scattered stars. Sibylla had insisted on it, had personally overseen every detail of her preparation. Tonight, Sibylla had said fiercely, "You outshine everyone, including Iolanthe." Looking at herself in the mirror, Malis had barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who belonged, someone who mattered. She wondered if she could make herself believe it. The Duke was waiting at the foot of the stairs. He wore formal black evening clothes, severe and elegant. His dark hair swept back from a face that still took her breath away. But it was his expression that stopped her heart. He looked at her like she was something precious, something rare. "Miss Whitmore," his voice was rough. "You look—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "Thank you, Your Grace." He offered his arm, and she took it, hyper-aware of the heat of him through layers of fabric. They entered the ballroom together. The whispers began immediately. Heads turned. Fans fluttered. Lady Iolanthe, resplendent in white silk and diamonds, watched from across the room with barely concealed fury. But Milas barely noticed. She was aware only of the Duke beside her, his presence solid and steady, anchoring her in a sea of strangers. The evening unfolded like a dream. She danced with Sir Gideon, who was kind, and Lord Ashbridge, who was tedious, and a young viscount whose name she immediately forgot. She made conversation with Lady Venetia, who seemed to approve of her more with each passing day. She avoided Lady Iolanthe with strategic precision, and through it all, she felt the Duke's gaze following her. When the supper waltz was announced, he appeared at her side. "This one is mine," he said. It was not a request. The waltz was slower than the others, more intimate. His hand at her waist felt like a brand. Their bodies moved together with a synchronicity that felt natural, inevitable. "You have been avoiding me," he said quietly. "I have been cautious. Is there a difference?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. Avoiding suggests fear. Caution suggests wisdom. And which is it? Fear or wisdom? Perhaps both. His hand tightened at her waist. "I do not want your caution, Milas. I do not want your fear." "What do you want?" The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. "I want," he began, then stopped. His jaw tightened. "I want things I have no right to want. Things that complicate everything. Things that terrify me." "Then we are both terrified." "Yes." His voice dropped to a murmur only she could hear, but I am beginning to think that terror is preferable to numbness. And you, Milas Whitmore, have woken me from a sleep I did not know I was trapped in. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, other couples twirled, oblivious. But Milas could see nothing but him. When the waltz ended, he did not release her hand. "Come with me." He led her through a side door, down a corridor she did not recognize, and into a small conservatory she had never seen. Glass walls revealed the snow-covered gardens beyond. Moonlight streamed through the panes, painting everything in silver and shadow. They were alone. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know. Someone could see us. I know. If Lady Iolanthe discovers. I do not care about Lady Iolanthe." His voice was fierce, raw. "I do not care about any of them. I care about you." Milas's breath caught. Cassius. His name on her lips undid something in him. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity burning in his eyes. "I have tried to be sensible," he said roughly. "I have tried to remember that this was an arrangement, a performance, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. But nothing about you feels temporary. Nothing about this feels like pretense. It was supposed to be pretense. Was it?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. Or did we simply tell ourselves that because the truth was too frightening? She could not answer. Her heart was pounding too loud, her thoughts scattered like leaves in a winter wind. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, leaning closer. "Tell me this is wrong, and I will walk away. I will honor our arrangement and never speak of this again." She should say it. She should tell him to stop, to remember their places, to think of the consequences. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, urgent, the release of weeks of tension and longing. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she melted into him like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "That was not pretense," he said. "No, it was not." "Then what do we do now?" Before she could answer, the conservatory door burst open. Lady Iolanthe stood in the doorway, her face a mask of triumphant fury. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "this is certainly enlightening." Behind her, Malus could see other figures gathering. Lady Heloise, Sir Gideon, the Viscountess of Pemberton with her damning lorgnette. They had been discovered. "I think," Lady Iolanthe continued, her smile sharp as a blade, "that the party deserves to know exactly what kind of woman has been sheltering under this roof." The nightmare had begun. The next hour was a blur of horror. Lady Iolanthe had done her work well. She had investigated Malus thoroughly, uncovering every detail of her dismissal from the Thornbury household, every whispered rumor, every damning half-truth. "A thief," Iolanthe announced to the assembled guests, her voice ringing with righteous indignation. Dismissed for stealing from her employers. Cast out on Christmas Eve for her crimes. And this, she gestured at the Duke with theatrical disgust, is the woman our host has been secretly courting. The ballroom erupted. Shocked gasps, scandalized whispers, accusing stares. Malus stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to defend herself. The words that might have saved her lodged in her throat like stones. "This is absurd." The Duke's voice cut through the chaos. Miss Whitmore was falsely accused. The Thornbury girl planted evidence to discredit her after she refused to lie about the girl's improper correspondence. "And you believe this?" Lady Heloise's voice was ice. "You believe the word of a penniless stranger over a respected family?" "I believe the truth." "The truth?" Iolanthe laughed, the sound brittle and cruel. "The truth is that you have been manipulated by a clever schemer who saw an opportunity and seized it. She targeted your vulnerability, your grief, your ridiculous desire to escape your duty. She is nothing but a fortune hunter in borrowed silk. That is enough." The Duke stepped forward, placing himself between Malus and the crowd. "I will not allow Miss Whitmore to be slandered in my own home." "Your home?" Lady Heloise moved toward them, her expression terrible. "This is the family's home, Caius, and you have shamed it by bringing this woman here, by deceiving us all with your little arrangement." Malus flinched. Lady Heloise knew. Of course she knew. She had probably known from the beginning. "Did you think I would not discover the truth?" Lady Heloise continued, her voice cutting. "A fake courtship to avoid your obligations? A scheme hatched on Christmas Eve with a desperate stranger? I expected foolishness from you, Caius. I did not expect betrayal. I was not betraying anyone. You were betraying your brother's memory. Iolanthe should have been Duchess. Edmund chose her. You dishonor him by casting her aside for this nobody." Mylis felt each word like a physical blow. She looked at the faces around her, saw the judgment, the contempt, and the satisfied cruelty. And then she looked at Caius. His face was pale, his hands clenched at his sides. He was fighting for her, defending her, putting everything at risk. Because of her, she could not let him destroy himself. Lady Heloise is right. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "Mylis?" Caius turned to her, confusion and hurt warring in his eyes. She forced herself to meet his gaze, forced herself to keep her voice steady. "This was a mistake. All of it. I should never have agreed to your arrangement. I should never have pretended to be something I am not." She swallowed hard, the lie burning in her throat. "I am exactly what Lady Iolanthe says. A schemer, a fortune hunter, a desperate woman who saw an opportunity and took it. That is not true. It is true enough. She stepped back, putting distance between them. I apologize for the disruption I've caused. I will leave Thornfield immediately. Malis, wait. She did not wait. She turned and walked through the crowd, her head high despite the tears streaming down her face. She climbed the stairs without looking back. She entered her room and closed the door and pressed her back against it, sliding to the floor. The sobs came then, wrenching and raw. She cried for the humiliation, for the loss, for the look on his face when she had lied. She cried for Posey, who she had promised to stay. She cried for the fragile hope that had bloomed in her chest, now crushed beyond repair. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she rose, dried her face, and began to pack. There was no other choice. She had to leave before her presence caused more damage. She had to disappear before the scandal consumed them all. She left the beautiful dresses. She left the silver hair comb from Sibylla. She left everything that was not hers. But she kept the book of Christmas poems, his mother's book. She could not bear to leave that behind. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. Miss Malis? Posey's voice, small and frightened. Malis opened the door to find the child in her nightgown, Admiral Whiskers clutched tight, her eyes wide with fear. The servants are saying you are leaving, that you did something bad. But that is not true, is it? You would not do something bad. Malis's heart shattered. She knelt, taking Posey's hands in hers. I have to go, little one. I am sorry. But you promised. You promised you would stay. I know. And I wish more than anything that I could keep that promise. But sometimes, we have to break our promises to protect the people we love. I do not want you to go. Posey's lip trembled. Please do not go. Malis pulled her into a fierce embrace, holding her tight. I will always remember you, she whispered against the girl's hair. And I will always love you. Remember that. No matter what anyone says, you are brave and wonderful, and your parents would be so proud of you. Miss Malis, be good for your uncle, and for Sibylla, and keep Admiral Whiskers safe. She released the child and stood, wiping her eyes. I have to go now. She walked past Posey, down the corridor, down the stairs, through the silent house. The carriage was waiting, arranged by a sympathetic footman who asked no questions. She climbed inside without looking back. As the carriage pulled away from Thornfield Hall, she pressed her hand against the window, watching the lights disappear into the darkness. Goodbye, she whispered. Goodbye to the house that had sheltered her. Goodbye to the child she had grown to love. Goodbye to the man who had made her believe, for one shining moment, that she might deserve happiness. The carriage carried her into the night, and Malis did not look back again. London was gray and cold, and utterly without mercy. Malis arrived at her family's modest lodgings 3 days after fleeing Thornfield, exhausted and hollow, and carrying nothing but her small valise and a heart full of ashes. Her mother embraced her without questions. Her brother, Jasper, hovered awkwardly, guilt written across his face. He had heard rumors, apparently. Word traveled fast when a duke was involved. I'm sorry, he said finally. I should have found work sooner. You should not have had to take positions that. It does not matter. Malis sank into a chair by the meager fire. None of it matters now. But it did matter. Every moment at Thornfield mattered. Every conversation with Caius. Every laugh with Sibylla. Every story read to Posey. Every kiss that had meant everything and changed nothing. She tried to settle back into her old life. She helped her mother with the mending. She visited the employment agency, though her lack of references made every interview a humiliation. She read and reread the book of Christmas poems until the pages grew soft with handling. Days passed. A week. 2. And then, on a bitter January afternoon, Felix Grimshaw appeared at her door. Mylis did not recognize the name when her mother announced the visitor, but when she saw him, she knew immediately who had sent him. Tall, sandy-haired, with the rumpled look of a man who had traveled fast and far. Miss Whitmore. He removed his hat, twisting it nervously. I have been sent by His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield. Her heart stopped, then lurched painfully back to life. I do not wish to see him. He has not come himself. Not yet. Grimshaw shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to. He has been, if you will forgive me, somewhat deranged since your departure. But Lady Sibylla convinced him to send me first, to prepare the way, as it were. There is nothing to prepare. What happened at Thornfield cannot be undone. His Grace disagrees. His Grace is wrong. Grimshaw reached into his coat and withdrew a letter. He asked me to give you this, and to tell you that Lady Iolanthe has left Thornfield in disgrace. Lady Heloise has. He consulted a small notebook, reconsidered her position on several matters, and Lady Posey has refused to eat anything but toast since you left. Mylis's eyes burned. That is not fair. No, it is not. But it is the truth, Miss Whitmore, and I am told you value truth above all else. He placed the letter on the table beside her and retreated to the door. I will return tomorrow for your answer. Whatever you decide, His Grace asked me to tell you that he respects your choice, but he wanted you to have all the information before you made it. He departed, leaving Mylis alone with the letter. She stared at it for a long time. Her mother hovered in the doorway, saying nothing, waiting. Finally, Mylis reached for it. The seal was dark green wax, pressed with the Ashford crest. She broke it with trembling fingers and unfolded the pages within. My dearest Mylis, I do not know if you will read this. I do not know if I have the right to ask you to. But I cannot let silence stand where words are needed, so I will write them even if they are never received. You lied to protect me. I know that now. You claimed to be what Iolanthe accused you of being because you thought it would save me from scandal, from conflict, from having to choose. But Mylis, I have already chosen. I chose the moment you challenged me in that chapel. I chose when you negotiated terms like we were equals. I chose when you held my niece and made her believe she was not alone. I chose when you read my mother's book like it was sacred, because to me it is, and somehow you understood that without being told. I love you, not the arrangement, not the performance. You, Iolanthe is gone. I told my aunt the truth, that I would rather remain unmarried for the rest of my days than spend them with a woman I do not love. She was furious. Then she was thoughtful. Then she asked about you. She asked if I loved you. I told her yes. She said that love was a form of madness, and then she said that sometimes madness was necessary. I am asking you to come back. Not as a governess, not as a scheme, as yourself, as the woman I want beside me, whatever that looks like, whatever form it takes. I will not force you into anything. I will not assume anything. I only ask for the chance to prove that this is real. Posey misses you desperately. Sibylla has threatened to disown me if I fail to bring you home. Even my aunt has grudgingly admitted that you have spine, which I believe is her highest compliment. And I miss you, Mylis. I miss your voice, your courage, your refusal to be intimidated. I miss the way you looked at me like I was more than a title, more than a duty, more than the ghost of my brother's memory. Come home, please. Yours, in whatever way you will have me, Caius. The letter blurred as tears spilled down her cheeks. Her mother appeared besides her, reading over her shoulder. Well, she said quietly, That is quite a letter. Yes. What will you do? Myless looked at the words again. Come home. As if Thornfield could ever be her home. As if she could ever belong in that world. But then she thought of Posy's face, of Sibylla's laughter, of Caius's eyes when he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had not known he was asking. I think, she said slowly, I think I need to go back. Her mother smiled. Then go. Thornfield Hall looked different in the pale January light. The Christmas decorations were gone, the evergreen garlands stripped away, the candles replaced by ordinary lamps. It looked severe, imposing, a fortress rather than a fairy tale, but it also looked like hope. Myless descended from the carriage on trembling legs. Grimshaw had accompanied her, maintaining a respectful silence throughout the journey. Now he gestured toward the great front doors. He is waiting in the library, he said. Lady Sibylla wanted to greet you herself, but His Grace insisted on speaking with you first. Privately. Of course he did. She climbed the steps, her breath catching in her chest. A footman opened the door, and she stepped into the entrance hall where this had all begun. It felt like a lifetime ago. She found her way to the library without assistance. The route was familiar now, worn into her memory like a path through snow. She paused outside the door, gathering her courage. Then she entered. Caius stood by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the winter light. He wore no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked exhausted. He looked desperate. He looked beautiful. You came. He did not turn around. His voice was rough, uncertain. So different from the controlled Duke she had first met. I received your letter, she said. And I thought you deserved an answer in person. Now he turned. His eyes found hers, and she saw everything in them. Hope and fear and love so intense it stole her breath. You lied for me, he said. At the ball, you told them you were a fortune hunter, a schemer, everything Iolanthe accused you of. You sacrificed yourself to protect me. I could not let you destroy your reputation for my sake. My reputation means nothing without you. Caius. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just before her, close enough to touch, but not touching. His hands clenched at his sides as if restraining himself. I have spent the past 2 weeks in agony, he said, imagining you alone in London, believing you were unwanted, and believing you had ruined everything. It was unbearable, Myless. You are not a fortune hunter. You are not a schemer. You are the bravest, most honest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. I am a governess from a modest family. You are the woman I love. He reached out finally, his fingers brushing her cheek with devastating tenderness. You are the woman who made me feel alive again. You are the woman I want beside me for the rest of my life. Your aunt will never accept me. My aunt has already accepted you. Myless blinked. What? After you left, I told her everything. The arrangement, the deception, all of it. I expected fury. Instead, she asked me one question. She asked if I loved you. And what did you say? I said yes, without hesitation, without reservation. Yes. The tears came then, spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to contain them. She said love is a form of madness, Caius continued, his thumb brushing away her tears. And she said that my father was mad for my mother, and that madness was the only thing that ever made him truly happy. She said, he took a shaky breath. She said, she would not stand in our way. Myless could not speak. The words she wanted to say lodged in her throat, too enormous, too terrifying. I am not asking you to marry me, he said quietly. Not yet. I am asking you to stay, to let me court you properly, openly, without schemes or pretense, to let me prove that this is real, And Posey? Posey has informed me that she will only accept you as her governess. She has been quite firm on the matter. A laugh escaped through her tears. She sounds determined. She is an Ashford. We are all determined when something matters. He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. Stay, Milas. Please. Not because you have no alternatives. Not because you need employment. Stay because you want to. Stay because you feel what I feel. She looked into his eyes, those winter gray eyes that had once seemed so cold and now burned with warmth she had never expected. I feel it, she whispered. I have felt it since you found me crying in your chapel. I have tried to deny it, to protect myself from wanting something I could not have. But I cannot deny it any more. Then do not. I love you, Caius. The words hung between them, trembling with significance. Then his arms were around her, pulling her close, and his mouth found hers in a kiss that tasted like tears and joy and homecoming. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. Stay, he said again. Yes, truly, truly, for as long as you will have me. Forever, then. She laughed, the sound bright and startled. Forever is a long time. Not long enough. The library door burst open, and Sibylla tumbled through, followed by a streak of white nightgown that resolved into Posey. You are back. Posey launched herself at Malus with the force of a small cannonball. You came back! I knew you would. I told Uncle Caius you would, and he did not believe me. But I knew. Malus knelt, gathering the child into her arms. I am back, little one. I am not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. Sibylla was crying openly, making no effort to hide it. I am so happy, she managed, so impossibly happy. Even Lady Heloise appeared in the doorway, her expression complicated, but not unkind. Well, she said dryly, I suppose this means I must begin planning a wedding. Aunt, Caius began, but the old woman held up a hand. Do not aunt me. If you think I failed to notice the way you have been moping about, you are mistaken. She fixed Milas with a sharp gaze. You have spine, Miss Whitmore. I still maintain this is madness. But I am beginning to think madness suits this family. It was not approval, exactly, but it was acceptance. And for now, that was enough. Milas looked around at the faces surrounding her, Posey in her arms, Sibylla beaming through tears, Lady Heloise grudgingly reconciled, and Caius watching her with an expression of such profound love that it made her chest ache. She had come here a refugee, desperate and alone. Now she was home. The announcement of their engagement was the scandal of the season. A duke marrying a governess. A penniless woman with no connections, no fortune, no family name of consequence. The gossips feasted on it for weeks, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. Milas ignored them all. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Dress fittings, with a modista Lady Heloise personally selected. Etiquette lessons that Sibylla turned into games. Afternoons in the nursery with Posey, who had appointed herself official wedding consultant and insisted on approving every detail. And evenings with Caius. They walked together through the snow-covered gardens, talking for hours about everything and nothing. They read together in the library, sharing passages from his mother's Christmas poems. They stole kisses in shadowed corridors, each one sweeter than the last. He treated her like a treasure, like a gift he still could not believe he had been given. She had never felt so loved. The wedding was set for February, intimate by ducal standards, but still grander than anything Milas had imagined. Her mother and brother traveled from London, installed in guest rooms so luxurious that Jasper walked around in a daze for 3 days. Lady Heloise, true to form, managed everything with military precision, while maintaining that she disapproved of the entire affair. "You will be a duchess," she reminded Malus one afternoon during a fitting. "That carries responsibilities, expectations. You will be scrutinized constantly." "I understand." "Do you?" Lady Heloise's gaze was sharp. "There will be those who never accept you, who will always see you as beneath the title. Then I will prove them wrong." Yeah, something that might have been respect flickered in the old woman's eyes. "See that you do." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, sunlight sparkling on frost-covered grounds. Malus dressed in a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with a bodice embroidered in silver thread that caught the light. Sibylla wove orange blossoms into her hair, crying the entire time. "You are beautiful," she declared. "My brother does not deserve you. He absolutely does not." Lady Heloise agreed from the doorway. "But he has you nonetheless. Do not let him forget his good fortune." The chapel where Caius had found her crying on Christmas Eve had been transformed. Candles lined every surface. White roses cascaded from the altar. The small space glowed with warmth and light, a sharp contrast to the cold, abandoned sanctuary of that first night. Malus walked the aisle on her brother's arm, her heart so full she thought it might burst. And there, waiting at the altar, was Caius. He watched her approach with an expression that stole her breath, wonder and joy and love so fierce it burned. "You are here," he murmured when she reached him. "Where else would I be?" The ceremony was brief but beautiful. Vows spoken in steady voices, rings exchanged with trembling hands. And then, finally, the words that changed everything. "You may kiss your bride." He kissed her tenderly, reverently, in front of their families, and the few trusted friends gathered to witness. When they broke apart, cheers erupted from the small congregation. Posy was loudest of all. The wedding breakfast was held in the grand dining room, transformed with white linens and silver candelabras. Toasts were offered, some sincere, some grudging. Lady Heloise delivered remarks that were technically congratulatory, but sounded more like warnings. And through it all, Caius held her hand beneath the table, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Later, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, they stood together on the terrace where they had shared their first real conversation. The snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting through the darkness. "Happy?" Caius asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Impossibly so. "No regrets?" She turned in his arms, facing him. The moonlight caught the sharp lines of his face, the warmth in his eyes. "Not one," she said. "You found me crying alone in a chapel on Christmas Eve. You gave me shelter when I had none. You saw me, truly saw me, when I was at my lowest. How could I regret any part of that? I was terrified that night," he admitted, "terrified that I would feel nothing, that the numbness would never lift. And then there you were, fierce and proud and utterly unexpected. And suddenly I was not numb anymore." "What were you?" "Awake." He pressed his forehead to hers. "For the first time since Edmund died, I was awake." She kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting snow and champagne, and forever. When they parted, he smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Come, wife. It is cold out here." "Wife." The word sent a thrill through her. She would never tire of hearing it. They walked back into the house together, into warmth and light, and a future she had never dared to imagine. Behind them, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Thornfield Hall in white silence. But inside, everything was warmth, everything was home. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Malus stood in the chapel where it had all begun. The space was no longer abandoned. Caius had restored it over the summer, replacing the broken windows, refinishing the pews, commissioning new altar cloths embroidered with the Ashford crest. It was a small gesture, he had said, a way of honoring the place that had brought them together. But Milas knew it was more than that. It was a declaration, a testament, a promise made permanent in stone and glass. Snow fell outside, just as it had that first night. The wind howled across the moors, rattling the windows, but inside the chapel, all was warm and still. Candles flickered on every surface, their light reflecting off the restored stained glass. And in her arms, wrapped in blankets of softest wool, slept her daughter, born 3 weeks early on the 5th of December, with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin. They had named her Helena, after Caius's mother, the woman whose Christmas poems had first cracked the ice around his heart. Myalise traced her daughter's cheek with one gentle finger. 1 year ago, she had knelt in this chapel, alone and weeping, convinced her life was over. Now she stood here with a husband she adored, a child she cherished, a family she had never expected to find. The chapel door opened, and Caius entered, shaking snow from his hair. "Posey is demanding that we begin the carol singing immediately," he reported. "She claims Admiral Whiskers has specifically requested in the bleak midwinter. Admiral Whiskers has excellent taste." He crossed to her side, looking down at their sleeping daughter, with an expression of wonder that still made her heart ache. 1 year, he murmured. 1 year. It feels like a lifetime. It feels like a moment. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "I found you crying alone in this chapel. You challenged me within minutes of meeting me. You changed everything. You saved me. We saved each other." They stood together in the candlelit silence, watching snow drift past the windows, listening to the wind sing its ancient song. Then Helena stirred, her small face scrunching in displeasure at the cold air. "We should go back," Milas said, "before Posey stages a rebellion." In a moment, Caius reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this here, where it all began." She opened it carefully, one-handed, and found inside a locket, gold, delicate, engraved with their initials intertwined. Inside was a miniature portrait of Helena, painted in exquisite detail. "So you can carry her with you always," Caius said, "and remember this moment, this Christmas, this beginning." Tears pricked her eyes. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Hardly. To me." His voice was rough with emotion. "To me, Milas, you are perfect. You always will be." She kissed him then, their daughter cradled between them, the chapel glowing with candlelight around them. When they parted, she smiled through her tears. "Happy Christmas, husband. Happy Christmas, wife." They walked back to the house together, Helena sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. The great hall blazed with light, voices raised in carols, Posey's demands carrying clearly through the cold night air. Milas paused at the threshold, looking back at the chapel one last time. 1 year ago, she had cried alone on Christmas Eve. Now, she would never be alone again. She stepped inside, into warmth and family and love, into forever. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I am grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you would like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.